In this video, we'll show you how to install a purpose-built Rockford Fosgate audio system on this Harley-Davidson motorcycle. Welcome back. I'm Eric, and today we're going to install an HD14U-STAGE2 on this silver 2018 Road Glide Ultra. The first thing we need to do is make sure to have the bike flashed by an authorized Rockford Fosgate dealer, which can be found on our website. Now we do this because the factory radio contains an excessive EQ curve. Now this is fine for stock, but with the high performance aftermarket system, we'll need to get rid of it. This will allow you to experience the full potential of the audio system that you'll be installing. We'll get started by removing the seat using a number 2 screwdriver and a 10mm socket to disconnect the battery negative. Okay, now we're ready to remove the fairing. First, we'll install the surface cover on our fender. We'll use a 3/16 Allen driver to remove a screw from each marker light. Then, use a T25 Torx driver to remove 4 bolts on the inner side of the fairing. Next, we'll use a 1/8" Allen to remove 4 screws holding the visor and upper fairing in place. Now, there are 2 additional screws that are located behind the speaker grills. So we'll use a small nylon pry tool to pop the speaker grill out from behind. At this step, it's best to have 2 people, one to hold the fairing in position and the other to remove the screws. To do that, you'll use a T27 Torx driver to remove 1 from each side. We'll disconnect the 2 small harnesses located on the top and remove the fairing. Okay, before we proceed, we need to remove the headlight. First, disconnect the couple harnesses on top that attach to the headlight. Then, using a 3/16 Allen wrench, remove 4 screws that hold it in place. Pull the headlight straight out and disconnect the electrical harness. To help us with installation of our amplifier later, we're going to remove the factory radio. To get started, take a photo or mark the cables and disconnect them from the back of the radio. Use a 3/16 Allen wrench to remove 4 screws holding the radio in place. Now technically you can install the amplifier without removing the radio, but we found it significantly easier and more intuitive to show you on camera. Now we're ready to remove our fairing speakers and install our new ones. The TMS65 speakers included in your kit contain extra grills for Street Glide and Tour Pak installs. Now for our shark nose fairing, we're going to use this wave style grill. We'll start by using a T25 Torx and remove 4 screws that hold the factory speaker in place. Then disconnect the wiring harness from the speaker. When removing the speakers, there's a tab on the top of the fairing that holds the grill in place. Now, to avoid potentially scratching the paint, you may need to use a 3/16 Allen to remove 2 screws on top and loosen 3 screws on bottom that hold the speaker pod in place. Once that's done, we'll install our new speakers by connecting the white terminal to positive and the black terminal to negative. Then use the existing hardware to secure the speaker into place, noting the alignment of the logo toward the bottom. Then, once you're done, repeat the process on the other side. Now that we're done with that, we're ready to install our Tour Pak speakers. To get started, we'll use a T10 Torx to remove 4 screws holding the grill and speaker in place. Detach the old speaker, noting the positive and negative connections. On the new speaker, we'll detach the grill from the trim ring, connect the speaker, and secure the assembly in place using the existing hardware. Once done, we'll attach the grill in place with the Rockford Fosgate logo facing toward the bottom. Okay, now that we have that done, we're ready to remove the gas tank. We'll start off by disconnecting the electrical harnesses and pulling the breather lines in back. Next, we'll disconnect the gas line. Push up on the hose, and while sliding the fitting upward, pull down on the gas line. Once that's done, we'll detach 2 rubber boots from both sides of the front of the gas tank and use a 1/2-inch socket to remove those bolts. Then we'll go to the back and remove 2 more bolts from the gas tank using the same socket. Alright guys, now we're ready to install our power harness. First, cut any zip ties off and unsnap the center channel cover. Next, we'll need to run our power harness up the left side of the forks through a plastic retaining bracket. Now for this next step, be sure to use a plastic removal tool. Do not use a flathead screwdriver or you'll likely chip the paint. Slide up underneath the retaining bracket and pop it off while pulling on the top. Pull it back slightly, then route our harness through without breaking the bracket. Finish routing the harness through the center channel and with enough slack for connection to the battery. Pull any additional slack toward the fairing. Okay, now we're ready to prep our amp bracket. First, position the bracket on the heatsink with the Diamond R logo and the flaps facing the same way. Note the direction of the heatsink fins. Then use a 2mm Allen wrench to secure the 4 flush mount screws into the amp plate labeled 2015 Plus Road Glide. Once that's done, remove the power connector from the amplifier since our power harness already has one installed. Then position the amplifier with the logo sitting between the flaps on the bracket and use a 2.5mm Allen and 4 provided screws to secure the amp to the heatsink. Okay, now that we're done with that, we're ready to tune and install the amplifier. Now, you'll need to tune the amp before proceeding. We offer this free amp tuning guide that's available in the description of this video and through this kit's product details page at rockfordfosgate.com. Once it's done, take the amplifier assembly, flip it over, and slide it up under the radio bracket so the lip slides into the bracket itself. Then, use a 5/16 wrench and socket to secure the flaps to the underside of the bracket using the supplied nuts and bolts. Okay, now we're ready to install our T-harness. First, take the harness that we removed from the source unit and plug it into the female connector of our T-harness. Slide the lever closed until you hear it click into place. Then we'll take the harness labeled amp input and plug both into the corresponding front and rear inputs of the amplifier. Take the harness labeled amp output and plug both into the corresponding front and rear outputs. Now we'll also use this Y adapter for installation of bag lids later. Plug the power harness into the power connector on the amp and plug the blue wire into the empty connector on top of the brake side. This blue wire is the amplifier remote turn-on. Take note that there's likely an empty plug that needs to be removed. Okay, now we're ready to reinstall our factory source unit. Since we have the radio out, I like to gently clean the faceplate and fairing bezel with a microfiber towel to remove any dust around the edges. Once we're done with that, we'll carefully position the unit back in place without pinching the input wires to the amplifier. We'll use a 3/16 Allen driver to secure the 4 screws that hold the radio into place. Then we'll plug the remaining end of our T-harness into the radio and slide the lever until it locks into place. Finally, refer to your photo and reattach the connections on the back of the radio. Okay, now we're ready to clean up our wiring. You likely notice some extra wires on our T-harness and included in the kit. Now this harness allows you to use our DSR1 digital signal processor. For more information, download our DSR1 setup guide for Harley-Davidson and keep an eye out for a complete configuration video we'll be releasing in the future. Now since we're not using a DSR1 on this motorcycle, we'll zip tie the blue wire that's used for the processor. We also include some extra wire adapters and boom audio bypass plugs that are not used on this motorcycle but are covered in other videos. Alright, great job guys. Now that we have all that done, we're ready to make our battery connections. We'll use a 1/2-inch socket to remove 2 screws that hold the engine control module in place. We'll disconnect a couple harnesses and flip the ECM tray up to make our positive terminal connection. Then we'll go ahead and reconnect our negative cable with our amplifier ground. Once that's done, we'll go ahead and put everything back in place. Alright, now that we have the bike reassembled, we're ready to test the system. I want to reiterate, before doing this, make sure that the factory radio is flashed. Now we do get some questions about the maintenance of the system, and since the speakers are element ready, they can get wet. Just avoid using a pressure washer. Instead, simply rinsing them off will suffice. As you can see, that install was pretty straightforward. If you prefer to have a professional do the install for you, we have a network of authorized Rockford Fosgate dealers that can be found on our website. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to contact our technical support. They can be reached Monday through Friday at 1-800-669-9899 or through live chat at the bottom of our website at rockfordfosgate.com. Until next time, I'm Eric. We'll see you again soon.